Hello again, it's Kevin Williamson, the planning manager, consultant, and trainer here at TEPCO Solutions in Baytown, Texas. Today on Tips and Tricks, we're going to be discussing the 5 phases of scope development, scope control for your turnaround event. We're going to cover the collection of the preliminary scope, risk ranking, scope challenge, scope freeze, and finalizing your work list. I want to talk a little bit right now about scope development, scope control, who is responsible for creating and managing the scope or work list. Turnaround manager is typically going to work with the unit, safety, and project reps to create the list. Now, the turnaround manager is responsible for the maintaining of the scope list, and it's usually done in the form of an Excel spreadsheet or other computerized planning database. Now, it's important to note, too, that one scope list should be utilized during the development for a single event. This helps minimize the duplication or omitting of necessary tasks. If a work request is written in different styles or different verbiage, we could go plan the same job and buy the same material more than once because it wasn't recognized that there was a duplication. So one work list is very, very important to maintain duplicating and omitting issues. Okay, I want to talk a little bit also about what the drivers are. They're a source of the scope or work requests and often depict what the funding source is for the work also. Okay, there are regulatory compliance required by inspections, environmental, health and safety, VOCs, reliability, availability, maintainability. Does the opportunity require turnaround? And there's other work scope that requires turnaround and capital projects and improvements. Okay, and the scope list should include at least the following: the work breakdown structure, which describes what it is, where it is, what it's associated with. Now, the system should also be part of this work request, and it could be utilities, it could be a process system. It helps in our scheduling a little later and optimization of our schedule. Then we need to also call out the driver, the tier. Now we're going to talk a little bit about tier ranking here in just a minute. What unit it's associated with, the equipment number, equipment name, the P&ID number, a description of the scope of work, is an MOC required, who originated the work request, and the risk matrix index, which we will also be talking about on one of the next slides. Okay. So in the first phase, we're collecting the preliminary scope, as I said before, okay, guys? Now, typical turnaround scope includes a lot of these following items here: malfunctioning equipment, equipment that'll be at or near its failure. Could be an end-of-life project for a total replacement. Could involve civil work and many other factors. Equipment needing repairs that cannot be performed online. They have to have a turnaround. Leaking valves, inoperable valves, PSVs. Equipment due for inspection, equipment needing to be cleaned due to fouling, any containment items such as clamps on piping and so on and so forth. You've got your volatile organic compound leaks that will have to be repaired during your turnaround event. Regulatory compliance, piping tie-ins, maintenance PMs. Now, there's often a computerized maintenance management system, backlog, which are simply maintenance items that could not be done without a turnaround. We'll pull those into the turnaround from the backlog and give those job numbers and put them on the work list. And then you'll have your process hazard analysis items. They're usually done in the project phase. In other various projects. Okay, and as I said before, let's talk a little bit about our tier ranking. Now, tier ranking categorizes the scope into business objective categories. So tier 1 will most likely be done during your turnaround event. It's going to be a safety or environmental, regulatory, or maintenance integrity item. Tier 2 is going to be an item that requires shutdown and necessary to ensure uninterrupted run until the next outage. Your tier 3 are reliability items that require to achieve a 97% operational efficiency and make it to your next scheduled turnaround. And then you have your tier 4 items. These are additional items that could increase efficiency or productivity, and they're justified on a return on investment basis. Now, these items also require a turnaround to execute, but tier 4 items can also be looked at as an item that could be removed from your turnaround event for cost purposes. Okay, and that's the phase 1. So let's move into phase two. Now we're going to talk a little bit about risk ranking here. And what you're looking at is a risk matrix index. Not hard to read. And this is how the developers of the work list will rank the risk of the project or the task. So you'll see on the left, you have your consequence, and across the top, you have your probability of it happening in the time frame considered. And if it's red or yellow, it's going to happen during the turnaround. If it's green or white, we can discuss and possibly remove it from the turnaround for cost effectiveness. So also a part of the risk ranking here, we use the risk ranking, of course, to rank the task for possible scope reduction. Now, you'll notice the categories here. These match up to the matrix index we just looked at on the previous slide. And you'll look at across the top here, we have the production loss, environmental, health, safety factors. Now, these are the factors that are used to determine the risk matrix. And as I said before, red or yellow are unacceptable risks and must be done. Green and white are, they're regions of acceptable risk or acceptable risks that can actually be utilized to remove items from your event for cost effectiveness. So that is your risk ranking. Okay, now and then we're going to move into the scope validation or scope challenge phase. This is phase three. Now, once the preliminary work list is accomplished, a series of validation challenges or sessions or meetings, so they should be administered. Now, these are to determine whether or not an item can be performed on regular run and maintain, or if it requires a unit outage to execute. In an effort to reduce costs, inspection tasks can also be reduced, as we mentioned here, to those required by regulatory, safety, reliability, production, performance-related reasons. Okay, and then we have a chart here, a flow chart here, determining whether or not it can be done on run and maintain, or does it absolutely require a turnaround to execute. Now, during these scope challenge meetings and these scope challenge sessions, the attendees should include someone from operations management, a quality assurance, turnaround manager, or their designee, the planning lead, operations maintenance coordinator, unit inspector, maintenance rep, a unit maintenance engineer, I&E rep, a safety rep, and a project rep. And then we'll work together to challenge these items to see if they can be done outside of the turnaround. If they can, we certainly want to do that, because turnaround events are a very costly opportunity to execute these jobs. Now, scope development and scope control. So we're going to move right into phase number 4 here, the scope freeze. So once the completion of the adequate scope validation sessions are done and we're at a 30% work scope estimate, now we have established a 30%, plus or minus 30% estimate at that point, and we're going to lock the scope. And it's also known as frozen, okay, by the stakeholders. Now, post-scope freeze timing, we need to allow a duration for the completion of detailed planning, scheduling, optimization, and budget development. And it's going to be based on the size and complexity of your turnaround event. We don't want to freeze scope too late. Okay, we got to allow time to get this detailed planning in so we can move into the 10% control budget we'll talk about in a second. Now, once we freeze the scope, it's going to initiate the change management process. And this is for cost clarity. And now any items being modified or added beyond scope freeze must go through the change management process. If you want something done on the unit, we're going to get it done, but it can be a wish list or a favor item. It has to go through the management process for cost clarity. Okay, now as far as the AWR, CWR planning, AWR and change work request planning begins after scope freeze of the event. Now, scope freeze should occur before the completion of the planning phase, as I mentioned before. Therefore, a planner or planners need to be assigned early on and have a full understanding of the AWR, CWR process before scope freeze. Now, an AWR, CWR plan consists of a condensed version of a detailed plan, and our planners need to be aware of that process. They're fully aware of the entire process. And then we'll move into phase 5 where we're finalizing our work list. Now, when the event work list is finalized, it moves into a 10% control budget phase, as I mentioned before. And then it is very closely managed. This is a plus or minus 10%. Now, accurate cost and schedule reporting become critical from this point forward all the way through commissioning and startup. We have to recognize and identify for scope control purposes, anything being taken in, anything being taken out of the scope must be monitored closely for scope addition or scope reduction. And that means cost addition or cost reduction for contingency. Okay, so that's the 5. So scope development, scope challenge, and scope control. The 5 are: collect the preliminary scope, risk rank, challenge that scope, make sure you need a turnaround, freeze that scope for cost clarity, finalize that work list, and move into your working budget. All right, and now adhering to these tips can put your event on the road to success. All right, guys, so that concludes the scope development, scope control session. If you have any questions or need consultation, call or come by. You'll love our casual vintage atmosphere where we're all about the performance, not the appearance. So join me next time on Tips and Tricks for project turnaround integration. Till then, don't forget to wash your hands.